creature with the feline head on the body of an Albion raised his snout and gave a deep yet surprisingly human-sounding roar. Before it could leap over the still-warm body of Penny Cowley and cause yet more horrific carnage among the surviving museum party, a gory spike erupted from the centre of its chest. The spike was covered in a deep purplish ichor, far thicker than ordinary blood, as well as being such an unhealthy colour. The beast looked down at the blade of Rongad's swordstick, then over his shoulder at Rongad himself. He snarled, then swung his right arm backwards, catching the Argon full in the face, sending him flying backwards against the wall of the corridor. From there he slid slowly to the floor, stunned. As this happened, the sword blade was pulled free of the Catman's body, not that either its insertion or removal had hampered the creature in any way. A small amount of purple ooze crept from the wound, but this was the only noticeable damage. The creature leapt over the corpse of Penny, arms outstretched. At that moment a shot rang out. Rang might not have been the best choice of words. Albion's sidearms gave more of a sharp phut sound as they released their needle-like projectiles. It was Nathan who had drawn his pistol, and his aim was true. The needle passed into the body of the Catman quite close to the existing sword wound, passing straight through to burst from its back and then ping off some part of the corridor behind it. Fortunately, it caused no further damage to the ship. Unfortunately, it caused no appreciable damage to the beast. The Catman now clamped its hands around a neck. Much to the Doctor's surprise, it was not Nathan's. It was his! The grip was fiendishly strong, and the Doctor choked as he grappled with the creature's wrists, trying in vain to prise those hands free. Romana made to draw her own sword stick, but was thwarted as Timmy Cowley snatched it from her. Screaming wildly, the grief-stricken Albion held it by the shaft, then swung the heavy brass pommel at the head of the creature, narrowly missing the Doctor in the process. The thing reeled backwards, snarling, losing its grip upon the Time Lord. Timmy's assault was the first thing to slow the Catman in any way.
"Quick!"
rasped the Doctor.
"Beat it!"
Romana spread her now empty hands wide, while Nathan, misunderstanding the instruction, took a step or two backwards.
With what?
Romana asked desperately. By this time the monster had intercepted Timmy's follow-up blow, and they were currently wrestling for control of the cane. The Doctor massaged his mauled throat while looking past Romana, Lou and Nathan into the dining room laid out for breakfast.
"Hit it with the chairs!"
the Doctor ordered, equally desperately. He then dashed past the others to grab one of the folding metal chairs for himself, folding it flat to make a more manageable weapon. The rest followed suit. They turned back towards the fray not a moment too soon. Timmy's strength, fueled as it was by fury and grief, had still not been a match for the beast, as it now had the Albion's security expert pinned against the wall, its bloody feline teeth growing steadily closer to his neck. The Doctor, Romana and Nathan set to work beating upon the Catman's back, head and legs with their improvised clubs. Lou had had trouble wielding her own chair due to the continued weakness in her wizened right arm. She had to content herself with delivering the odd kick whenever a gap presented itself. The creature turned to meet this new onslaught, but was clearly losing strength. Not only that, but it had freed up Timmy to resume his attack with the soggy end of the sword cane. Slowly the Catman's legs began to crumple, until at last it lay upon the metal floor, twitching. Eventually the museum party stopped hitting it, the last of these being Timmy, who ultimately had to be gently pulled away by a concerned Lou. Even though it seemed the beast was finally dead, pulverized as it was, the thick purple gore everywhere, still parts of its body twitched spasmodically, giving it the eerie semblance of continued life.
"Oh, I say,"
came a familiar voice from the direction of the dining room. Everyone turned to find the steward, Sub-Lieutenant Leslies, in the middle of that compartment, staring their direction. As they turned, they had inadvertently revealed the destruction which had been wrought. Sub-Lieutenant Leslies never completed his sentence, as his eyes widened and he doubled over behind a nearby table, throwing up violently. As soon as he was able, casting one terrified glance in their direction, he dashed away towards the front of the ship. Nathan helped Rongad to his feet, while they all attempted to take stock of the situation.
What was that thing?
Romana finally asked.
"Sub-Lieutenant Leslies, I believe,"
the Doctor responded. Romana punched him hard in the shoulder for his trouble.
"Ow!"
the Doctor replied. Then he withdrew his sonic screwdriver and scanned the fidgeting remains of the Catman.
No surprises here, unfortunately. Albion blood, obviously, but de-energized, or perhaps I should say re-energized, by some additional compounds. Some nth material concoctions? Ah, and a good smattering of alien material. I imagine the contributions of our good friend Rongad here.
Rongad winced.
Oh, come on, there's no need to remind me of that.
The doctor raised an eyebrow.
Isn't there? No matter. This thing is clearly of the same origin as those which attacked us in Northwestwood Cemetery. Agents and creations of Dr. Nugatti. We should investigate his room without delay. It is right here, after all,
he said, nodding to a door on the right-hand side of the corridor.
Too late,
Romana said grimly, tapping the doctor on the shoulder. He turned to look back past it to the dining area beyond. Striding purposefully through the middle of it was a uniformed man whose trim obviously denoted high rank. Following some distance behind him, and making no effort to shorten that distance, crept Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's, struggling to keep down what remained of his dinner.
"What the devil is going on here?"
The new arrival barked officiously.
"My steward tells me there's been some sort of horrific accident."
The doctor stepped forward to address the officer.
Captain Povey, I presume? Well, you are right that it is horrific, but it is far from an accident.
With that, the doctor moved to one side to allow the captain a better view of the carnage beyond. Captain Povey's eyes widened and his jaw dropped. Quickly he shook himself and recovered his air of command.
"Somebody had better have a damned good explanation for what happened here, or you will all be spending the rest of the journey in the brig, at least until I can offload you to real prisons, ASAP.
The doctor cocked his head at the captain.
Well, I have an explanation, but whether you'll think it good or not rather depends on whether you're a fan of horror.
Povey frowned but nodded for the doctor to continue.
We discovered our companion, Penny, here as you see her, with her throat torn out, after hearing her scream from our bunks.
As he said this, he waved an arm towards the prone and bloody figure of Penny Cowley.
We also discovered this,
he continued, now waving towards the battered corpse of the Catman.
Standing over her body, teeth bloody, and ready to do the same to us as he had so obviously done to our friend.
Here the captain interrupted.
"That's Dr. Nugatti's manservant,"
he cried, aghast.
"You murdered him."
The doctor raised an eyebrow.
Man, you say? Perhaps you should take a closer look. I can assure you it was self-defence, as I'm sure Mr. Rongad, who is not of our group, would attest to.
The captain continued to frown.
"Leslie's!"
He barked impatiently over his shoulder at the skulking steward.
"Get over here this instant. Watch these people while I examine the bodies."
Philip Leslie's crept a little closer.
Oh, sir, really? Must I?
He whined. Povey glared at him.
"Your one job is to ensure the safety and happiness of the passengers. It is plain to anyone with eyes that you have, once again, fallen down on the job."
Leslie's looked glum.
Oh, crikey, you've been peeking.
He grumbled forlornly. The captain nodded grimly.
"I'm rather afraid I have, and what's more, thanks to your ineptitude, it seems I have still more peeking left to do. So get up here, quick smart."
The steward dawdled up to stand alongside his captain. Much in the way it seemed Albions did not possess the capacity to go red in the face, it appeared they also could not turn green. Nevertheless, Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's did his best to give that impression in monochrome.
"Watch them!"
Captain Povey barked, gesturing at the museum party and Rongad. Philip looked relieved to be allowed to watch something other than the bloody corpses. The captain now took a couple of steps closer to the bodies, then stopped dead as he saw the face of Nugatti's manservant clearly for the first time.
"Dear God!"
he exclaimed, eyes wide.
"That's what I said,"
Rongad supplied, trying to engender a feeling of camaraderie. The captain frowned at him. A series of odd gulping sounds came from Philip Leslie's, whose attention had been drawn to the gory mess once more, leaving him fighting to control his digestive tract. Instead of examining Nugatti's manservant, Captain Povey elected to first examine the body of poor Penny Cowley. He knelt down next to her corpse and gave her wounds close inspection.
"She looks as though she's been mauled by some wild animal. The teeth marks around her neck and throat are quite evident."
Really? And who here do you think most likely to have caused them?
Lou weighed in with heavy sarcasm. Povey shot out yet another warning frown, this time directed at the professor. The captain then turned his attention to the manservant.
"I have never seen anything like this. You obviously gave this man quite a beating, but even I have to admit this is no ordinary Albion's head."
Here he moved the scarf a little and raised the fur on the creature's neck.
"Dear God!"
he repeated.
"There are stitch marks here. And healing scar tissue.
The doctor ducked down next to the captain to get a closer look. The captain glared at him furiously.
Just what the hell do you think you're doing?
He snapped at the doctor. The doctor looked up from his own examination of the creature's neck. Oh, I was just fascinated by your discovery of scar tissue. We've encountered some of these things before, and are slowly beginning to understand their nature. This is the first time we've noticed evidence of new growth on these bodies. This explanation had done nothing to mollify the captain. However, before he could tell the doctor exactly what he thought of both it and the doctor himself, another voice rang out.
What about my wife?
This heart-wrenching, broken cry came from Timmy Cowley. His fists and face were balled up with grief-fueled rage, and he was shaking like a plucked bowstring. Clearly he was close to a further violent expression of his inner torment. Captain Povey studied him for a moment before giving a resigned sigh. He took off his dark blue jacket and slowly laid it over the head and body of Penny Cowley. Then he stood up to address his audience.
We have some cold storage facilities in the main envelope. I shall have some stores moved around and we shall find space for Mrs. Cowley and that thing,
he said determinedly, his last remark made with a nod towards the Catman. Timmy seemed to calm a little. His shoulders slumped and his head dropped.
This is not over,
the captain continued sharply, staring round intensely at all those gathered before him.
Do not think of going anywhere. When I get back, more will be said of this. Much more.
Before the captain could leave, Lou held up a hand.
Could we not at least take Timmy back to his bunk? Don't you think he suffered enough?
Captain Povey harumphed impatiently.
You might be right. I will allow that, but only on condition you stay with him and watch over him. And do not leave your bunks until I give permission, if I give permission.
The captain turned his attention to the hapless Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's.
And you will stay here and watch the rest of them. Make sure they don't interfere with the bodies any further or wander off. Let's see if you can manage that much at least. You truly are the Albion's burden.
He finished exasperatedly.
Right you are, sir.
Leslie's responded, attempting to sound cheerful. Captain Povey made to leave once more, but was halted again, this time by a cough from the doctor. Ahem. And while you're near the telecom room, you might want to make inquiries with the authorities about our prior experience. Ask about the clearance of Northwestwood Cemetery and the Albion Imperial Museum's involvement in the affair, he advised. The captain gave him a hard stare, then spun on his heels and left, ushering Lou and Timmy with him. The doctor surveyed his remaining companions, Romana, Rongad and Nathan, and his surroundings. Sub-Lieutenant Leslie stood at the entrance to the dining area, beaming awkwardly. He shrugged apologetically as the doctor's eyes fell on him. The doctor gave him a somewhat cold and calculating smile in return. He withdrew his sonic screwdriver and turned away from the steward to face the cabin door immediately in front of him, number 13. The screwdriver gave a chirp and the lock a pop. The doctor reached for the handle and turned it. He pushed the door, which swung inwards to reveal the room within.
I say,
Philip Leslie's piped up.
I really think you oughtn't to be doing that. I mean, I'm terribly sorry and everything, but I do have my orders.
The doctor turned his head towards the unfortunate officer, still wearing his slightly disconcerting smile. Which were, I believe, to prevent us interfering with the bodies, were they not? He asked innocently.
Well, rather. I mean, that and prevent you all wandering off.
Philip said, putting on as brave and yet simultaneously friendly face as his features could accommodate. The doctor nodded curtly. Excellent. Well, if we all go into room 13, not only will we be further from the corpses, we will also be corralled into one place. And, as you watch us, you won't even have to look at the bodies. Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's brightened considerably upon hearing this.
Oh, I say, crikey, that's terribly kind of you.
The doctor's smile was now shared by Romana and Rongad. Nathan had once more resumed a more distracted air. Oh, think nothing of it, the doctor said as he led his companions into Dr. Nugati's cabin. The first-class accommodation was considerably more spacious than the two-bunk berths of standard class, albeit of a necessarily compact and lightweight design. On the far wall was a porthole, at this time covered by a curtain. Beneath it sat a fold-out bench, currently remarkably free of clutter. This unusually sparse, unlived-in appearance extended to the rest of the cabin. The two bunk beds attached to the left-hand wall looked as though they had never been slept in. On the right-hand wall, where it met the exterior wall, was an enclosed ensuite toiletry cubicle. Between this and the entrance wall was a small area for storage. It was here that the only evidence of habitation presented itself. There were 2 sizable tea chests here, lids in place but not nailed down. The doctor prized the lid off one, while Nathan, taking it as a cue, wrenched the other free. All 4 of the companions stared down at their inexplicable contents. The 2 chests were full of soil. Not entirely full, it turned out, upon closer inspection. Each one contained a void which, coincidentally and worryingly, could probably just contain the body of a man, if seated on the bottom with his knees drawn up to his chest. Romana glanced at the doctor with a growing look of trepidation.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
She asked. The doctor raised his eyebrows with a grimace. I do hope not. It would be terribly redundant if we were similarly maladjusted. However, insofar as these chests are concerned, I suspect we may share common suspicions. The good doctor and manservant certainly seem to have little use for beds. He conceded cautiously. Nathan lowered his head into the chest nearest to him. Oh, really, must you? The doctor asked wearily as the detective dabbed his tongue into the soil. He withdrew his head and looked up at the doctor.
Limey,
he said simply. I beg your pardon? The doctor said, sounding almost offended. Romana stepped forward, licking the end of her forefinger, dipping it in the soil, then licking it again. Oh, for goodness sake! The doctor cried in exasperation, rolling his eyes frantically.
Definitely alkali.
Romana agreed with Nathan. The doctor waved his sonic screwdriver in front of their faces, clearly miming, "We have this." He suspended the device above the soil in the nearest tea chest and scanned briefly. It contains lime, among other things, he said grumpily, feeling his thunder had been stolen a little. You fellas do have the oddest habits, Rongad said, shaking his head and smiling. He was standing in the doorway of the toilet cubicle and had clearly been conducting his own investigation. Look what I found, he continued, holding up a rolled piece of polished black leather. And I didn't have to lick anything to get it, he added with a wink. He popped open a fastener and rolled the leather bundle onto the floor between them all. It turned out to be a very compact holder for hypodermic needles, around a dozen in total, each containing some sort of thick ooze or ichor of a variety of unhealthy-looking hues. The doctor waved his sonic screwdriver one more time for emphasis, then quickly scanned the contents of the wallet. Quite the biochemical toolkit, it seems, he pronounced. I can't identify everything present precisely. We need to pop back to the TARDIS for a full analysis. However, I am detecting compounds with elements of nth material, as well as some traces of argon. Rongad nodded grimly. Dr. Nuggetti's get-up-and-go kit, he agreed. At that same moment they heard footsteps approaching along the corridor outside, and a cry of,
What the bloody hell?
The doctor hurriedly bound the roll of syringes back up and hid them in his satchel. Captain Povey burst into view behind Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's. He looked like he wanted to throttle him. Leslie spun round to face his captain, friendly grin still plastered in place, but a look of confused panic in his eyes.
Everything's shipshape here, sir. I have our guests confined in this room to keep the corridor clear and whatnot.
What not indeed?
Captain Povey bristled.
And you thought it best to store them in the room of one of our recently deceased guests? I can see why my simple orders may have been a little too demanding for my steward. Perhaps more static charges might agree with him more. The latrines are generally quite stationary.
Oh, rather, sir.
Leslie's agreed cheerfully before realising what the captain meant.
Oh, crikey, I mean, rather not, of course. Honestly, sir, I won't let you down.
Povey continued to glower at the steward.
Again, you mean?
He growled.
Sir?
Leslie's responded bemused.
You mean, let me down again. Past experience leads me to believe otherwise. Go and help these crewmen move the bodies to cold storage, at the double.
Right-ho, sir.
Leslie snapped back, saluting smartly. He then joined 4 crewmen in the corridor to supervise their task. The captain now turned his ire upon the doctor and his companions.
And now, I don't suppose you'd care to tell me what you were all doing in here. I've a good mind to have you all strip-searched.
The doctor, Rongad, Nathan and Romana all looked less than pleased at the prospect. Only Romana's frown prompted the merest hint of a change of heart from the captain.
By one of the ship's nurses in your case, of course.
He grumbled at her. did you contact your supervisors as I suggested?" The doctor interrupted. Captain Povey switched his glare from Romana to the doctor.
Naturally, I had to report what had occurred to HQ. When I gave them the bare facts, including the description of Dr. Nugatti's manservant, they were quite unimpressed by the whole thing. I think they thought I must be going space crazy. However, when I mentioned Northwestwood Cemetery and the museum's involvement, dots seemed to connect for them. They suddenly became a lot more interested in details. They all seemed to have some measure of respect for your little party.
The doctor smiled with forced modesty. "Ah, well, you know, experience has its rewards," he said casually.
Well, you may have impressed some brass somewhere, but you've yet to prove yourself of any worth to me.
The captain snapped back.
All I see is an odd assortment of loosely associated individuals in the middle of mayhem. I suggest you confine your wanderings to your berths and the observation room. If I even sniff a hint of you being elsewhere, I'll have you put off the ship, whether we're in port or not."
With that, the captain stood back from the doorway of room 13 and swung his right arm expressively in the direction of the dining room. The doctor and the others each nodded their appreciation for his understanding, one by one, as they filed past him into the corridor. Rongad returned to his room in first class, while the doctor, Romana and Nathan made their way to their berths to check on Timmy and Lou, and to plan their next move. One thought dominated each of their minds. Where was Dr. Nugatti? Timmy was red-eyed and oscillating between complete withdrawal and barely contained rage. Lou looked relieved to be relieved of sole responsibility for his well-being, nursemaid never being her natural calling.
He could be in another cabin,
Nathan suggested as the topic returned once again to Nugatti's whereabouts. Horrific though recent events had been, they did seem to have the silver lining of reviving a measure of focus and engagement in the private investigator. "Possible, but unlikely," the doctor replied. "If they haven't already begun, then I'm sure the crew will be searching all the other cabins very shortly."
Up in the envelope with the cargo?
Romana suggested. The doctor nodded. "When you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth," the doctor pronounced gravely.
That sounds awfully familiar.
Romana responded quizzically. The doctor looked disproportionately flustered upon hearing these words from Romana's lips, almost panicked, as if he had committed a massive faux pas which risked discovery at any moment. Yes, well, I'm sure I've never said those words to you before. However, I may have been inspired by a famous historical figure, and I have no doubt you have encyclopedic knowledge in that regard," he finished with a forced smile. Romana might have guessed some of the cause of the doctor's discomfort.
Oh, I'm sure you've never said it to me, either.
She teased. The doctor frowned and shook his head as if to clear it. "Anyway, I dare say you are correct in your guess as to Nugatti's location. But how did he get past us? We are, after all, right next to the main stairs."
Perhaps there is a second set.
Lou suggested. The doctor nodded. "It's possible, and may well bear further investigation. However, wherever Nugatti is currently stowed, he is going nowhere, at least while we're in deep space. So I suggest we get what sleep we can and continue our search after breakfast. One of us should stay awake on watch, with eyes and ears open, in case we do get some sign of Nugatti trying to use the stairs here." Everyone agreed, and the doctor elected to take first watch. The plan paid off sooner than expected, but not by Nugatti putting in an appearance. The doctor's hour-long shift over, he had leaned down from the top bunk and was prodding Romana awake with his sonic screwdriver. At that moment they both heard multiple footfalls coming down the steps from above. Peeking out through the gap in the curtains of their berth, the two Time Lords saw 4 crewmen clattering into the metal-floored corridor. One of them rapped smartly on the door to the flight deck. A second later it was opened by Captain Povey himself.
"Report!"
He barked at the sailor.
"Sir, the bodies are all stored in cold storage locker D. All the food supplies from there distributed among lockers B and C. I've made a full revised manifest, sir."
As he said this, the crewman handed the captain a small notebook.
"Very good, Chief Petty Officer Twerpy. It's nice to see somebody in this crew taking their duties seriously. Which brings me neatly onto the subject of Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's. He hasn't by any chance locked himself in cold storage?" "No, sir,
Twerpy barked back.
"A pity."
Povey responded wistfully.
"No, sir, we discovered something odd and Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's decided to stay on site and keep an eye on things."
Twerpy explained.
An unusual level of decisiveness, almost competency, from our steward there. What odd thing did you uncover? Sir, it looked like someone had been trying to root through one of the cargo pens. The door had been left open on pen 12A, and things had been shifted around a bit. Nothing missing, none of the crates inside opened either. Almost like we disturbed someone in the act of looting. Anyway, we checked inside and made sure no one was hiding in the pen itself, then chained it up with extra padlocks to ensure no one gets in there again.
Captain Povey nodded his approval.
Very good, Chief Petty Officer. And Leslie's opted to stand guard. Wonders will never cease.
At that, the captain flicked a lever on the wall, and the bottom section of the steps to the main envelope folded up to form a robust-looking hatch in the ceiling.
That should keep things secure for now. A security detail needs forming to conduct a proper search of the envelope, appropriately armed, of course.
Chief Petty Officer Twerpy looked a little uncomfortable and awkward.
But, sir, what about Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's? I mean, you've just shut him in. What if there is a dangerous maniac on the loose up there? Well, I suppose now there are two,
The captain said with a chuckle.
No, seriously though, our good steward should know how to operate the step mechanism from above, if he needs to come down. Should know.
He then added with a wink. The captain and the 4 crewmen all entered the forward compartment containing the flight deck and other crew stations, the door closing behind them. The doctor swung himself down from the upper bunk to sit next to Romana on the lower one.
We have to get up there,
he said simply.
We need to catch this Nugatti fellow before he jumps ship with the Scarab and does, well, whatever it is he's going to do with it.
Romana nodded, but it was clear she had some reservations.
Agreed. However, the captain did say he'd throw us into space if he caught us wandering around. And I'm sure they'll hear us straight away if we try and lower the steps here.
The doctor frowned, recognizing the truth to her words.
Yes, we should certainly try and put off any awkward encounters with the good captain for as long as possible. However, in the event of us running into him, I suggest we tell him we are making our daily pilgrimage to honour the body and spirit of our fallen comrade, in line with the most sacred of Xeron practices and traditions.
Romana frowned at him.
Do the Xerons actually do that?
She asked curiously.
The doctor shrugged. I haven't the faintest idea. However, hopefully neither do the Albions.
Romana allowed the doctor a single chuckle.
Fair enough.
She said.
But that still leaves us with the problem of how to get into the envelope without using the boarding steps.
At this final statement, the curtain in front of them parted slightly, and Nathan Ivan's head poked through, crumpled fedora and all.
I couldn't help hearing your conundrum there,
he said, reasonably cheerfully, if still looking a little haunted.
And I think I have a solution.
The doctor opened his hands, gesturing for him to elaborate.
Well, it just so happens that the sanitary cubicles have a small schematic of the gondola printed on the backs of the doors. I notice there's another set of steps at the very rear of the gondola. I think we could use them, and I suspect Nugatti already did.
The doctor nodded appreciatively.
Very good. Excellent use of your investigative skills. Now, I think it best if you leave the rest to Romana and myself. The fewer of us are creeping around, the more discreet we can be.
Nathan shook his head vehemently.
No way. I'm going with you all the way on this. I've a feeling this Nugatti plans to unleash a whole heap of trouble, one that will damn us all. And the longer you keep arguing with me, the more likely you'll wake the others up. Then you'll have a real party on your hands.
The doctor narrowed his eyes at Nathan, scrutinizing him intently.
You have a feeling, eh? Just playing a hunch, are we, detective? Well, it seems three's company, and since we do not want a crowd, I suggest we head off without delay.
The doctor, Romana, and Nathan crept through the observation room, heading towards the stern of the ship. It was still early morning, and fortunately neither crew nor passengers were around as they traversed it, and then on into first class. Their luck did not hold, however, as they were halted by a loud hiss coming from their right. Looking round sharply, they saw the door of cabin 6 was open a crack. The face of Rongad was peering through. Now he opened the door wide.
"Good day, fellas,"
he whispered breezily.
"Just out taking the air? Sounds like a doogie rev idea. I think I'll join you."
The doctor's eyes rolled. "I suppose it would be futile to suggest you leave this to us." Rongad inclined his head.
"You suppose right. You forget. I've too much skin in this game. Or blood. In any case, you're stuck with me."
The doctor shrugged his resigned acceptance of the situation. At last they found the rear steps leading up from the gondola to the main envelope.
Unlike the rather steep retractable steps at the front, these formed a more gentle slope following the angle of the fairing in of the gondola to the main body of the airship. Above them was a double hatchway which appeared to open upwards at its centre, 6 feet wide in total, making each individual door 3 feet across, while both were 6 feet in length. The doctor led the way up the steps until he was forced to bend over to avoid banging his head. The doors were secured by a single bolt, albeit a robust-looking one designed to keep an airtight seal in the event of emergency. The doctor flipped the fastener through 90 degrees, then threw the bolt clear. Quietly, he gently lifted the right-hand door, climbing the rest of the steps as he did so. Soon he and the others were standing on the gantry nearest to the rear of the ship's main body. They checked the nearby cargo compartments all the way to the tail of the vessel, looking for signs of tampering or even habitation. When they had exhausted all the most accessible options, they began to make their way forward, beyond the hatch through which they had entered. Their progress was halted by the figure of a man walking along the gantry towards them.
"Oh, hello,"
It said brightly.
"Fancy seeing you here."
Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's face then fell as a realization suddenly hit him.
"Oh, crikey. I don't think you're really supposed to be here,"
he said with embarrassment.
On the contrary, the doctor replied, we are simply observing the ancient Xeron custom of Moulinex, the daily honouring of our fallen dead. No one in good conscience could prevent us fulfilling our religious obligations.
"Oh, rather,"
Philip Leslie said contritely, beaming once again.
"One wouldn't dream of pooh-poohing such things. I quite understand. Would you like me to show you to where your friend is, lying in state?"
That is most kind.
Romana replied, adding her weight to the pretence. The steward began to lead them towards the prow of the ship. They had not gone very far, however, when Nathan grabbed Philip's arm, pulling him to a halt, the rest of the party following suit.
"Tell me, sir, is there anyone else up here at the moment?"
Philip Leslie shook his head.
"Oh, I say, hardly. It was a lonely and thankless watch up here, but somebody had to do it,"
he told them proudly.
"Then who's that?"
Nathan asked, pointing ahead of them and a little above the gantry. About 7 feet up one of the ladders leading to the spine of the ship hung a well-dressed figure in black. He was wearing tails over matching trousers and a starched white shirt with high-standing collar. Around this collar was wrapped a thin black bow tie. Even at this distance, flashes of light could be seen, reflections from the round lenses of metal-rimmed spectacles. The Albion's slicked back white hair looked almost like part of his flesh. There could be no doubt. They had found Dr. Nugatti. The entire party dashed forward, leaving Sub-Lieutenant Leslie standing shocked and confused. Then the doctor stopped dead, spreading his arms wide to detain all those with him.
What are you playing at?
Rongad asked, for the first time displaying outright hostility towards the doctor.
Look!
The doctor cried, nodding up at the white-haired gentleman. By now they were only 10 meters away from the suspended Albion. They realized he had one hand free of the ladder. With it, he trained a pistol on them.
"So pleased to finally meet you all,"
Nugatti said cordially, his mouth smiling even as his eyes remained as cold as a corpse. His voice was similar to Nathan's inasmuch as it was a drawl, but it did sound different. Whether this was because of his Hungarian origin or some regional variation within the island of Amarek, the Time Lords could not tell.
"Please, don't come any further,"
Nugatti continued.
"I'd hate to have to kill you. I mean, I could always bring you back again afterwards, but that rather presupposes I'd be inclined to do so. And my serums are rather expensive and hard to come by."
This last statement was made with a grin and a wink, and yet nobody felt encouraged to join him in his good humour. This was particularly true of Rongad.
You won't kill me.
He growled at the Albion medic.
I'm the Golden Goose, remember? What if you need a refill?
Dr. Nugatti chuckled coolly.
"Huh! You think you're so special? I have allies, powerful allies. I have contact with, or contacts with contact with, vast godlike creatures from beyond our universe. Icthultu, Setesh, Inar the Fetid, other more numerous devilish entities that commune with us on their behalf. These agents of theirs are now my agents. They search our universe even now, and with far more ease than even the more technologically advanced races, Argons, Xerons. Ha! You have no idea how wide their influence stretches. Soon they will have tracked down others of your race, plenty enough to fill my vials and needles. Not so special after all, eh, Rongad?"
You bastard! Rongad cried, running forward a step. Romana and the doctor each had to grab an arm to prevent him as Nugatti aimed his pistol at the Argon's head. At that moment, a shot rang out. Time seemed to slow as the Time Lords stood, still holding an arm each, Rongad between them. A needle sailed past them, moving as if in slow motion, the doctor and Romana's faces slowly transforming to those of abject horror as they realized what had happened. Nathan had drawn his own pistol and fired at Nugatti. The needle struck the Albion doctor dead in the centre of his chest. It did not stop there, as it turned out, tearing through body and clothes to burst from his back. It continued its course, onwards and upwards, and punctured the gas bag immediately behind Nugatti. The doctor and Romana were astounded and relieved not to be instantly surrounded by flames or torn apart by an explosion.
Nathan! What were you thinking?
Romana squeaked at the detective. Then a look of surprise gripped her features as she realized she actually had squeaked. In spite of the situation, the doctor allowed himself a chuckle.
Helium.
He muttered to himself, also high-pitched. Nathan frowned at both Time Lords.
What are you talking about?
He fluted.
Of course it's helium. What do you think we used as lighter-than-air gas? Hydrogen? Do we look insane?
The doctor waggled his head noncommittally, then could not prevent another chuckle escaping.
Hehehe. Never.
He exclaimed, shaking his head. Another laugh broke through their conversation, driving away all good humour in an instant. It came from Dr. Nugatti. He still hung from the ladder, still had his pistol trained upon the group. The wound in his chest had an unusually small circle of blood around it. What was oozing out looked thick and purplish.
You did it to yourself.
This shocked accusation came from Rongad. Nugatti laughed again.
You surely didn't think I was uncovering the secret of eternal life for the benefit of everyone else and not sharing in it. I'm not that much of a philanthropist. It wasn't easy either. Getting my servants to kill me, then bring me back in just the right way, was a hairy business. You wouldn't believe how relieved I was when I woke up again.
He said this last line with another knowing wink, this time aimed squarely at Rongad, who seethed impotently up at him. The doctor coughed.
Excuse me, but I think you might be overselling your discovery a little. We recently discovered chairs proved quite an effective termination method.
Dr. Nugatti did not look fazed by this, and just shrugged and smiled.
Maybe, maybe not. I'd still keep an eye on my manservant if I were you, just in case. Oh, and I dare say a supernova would wipe me out just like anybody else, but with a modicum of care, I should be around for quite some time.
His face became a little more hardened and serious.
Now, I'm afraid, entertaining as all this is, I have places to be. Please don't be foolish enough to follow me. You all only have one shot, after all.
With that, he resumed his climb towards the ceiling of the airship. Romana suddenly guessed his intention.
He's going to open the hatch. It's going to suffocate us all.
Everyone realized they were helpless to prevent him. He could easily pick them all off if they tried to follow him. He reached the hatch and looked down one final time.
As our good captain would say, toodle pip.
He twisted the release mechanism and heaved the hatch downwards. Everyone felt their ears popping as the air rushed up and out with a sound like a roaring jet. The sound dwindled and died. Although struggling to breathe, they were surprised to find it was still possible. "We must be in atmosphere," the doctor cried. One benefit of the sudden venting was that his voice, along with everyone else's, had returned to normal.
Oh, I say, rather,
said Sub-Lieutenant Leslie's, who had wandered up behind them. He glanced at his watch.
We should have begun our descent towards Buda Aerodrome by now. Crikey! Lucky we were on schedule.
The doctor and Romana exchanged weary eye-rolls. At that moment, Rongad ran towards the ladder, obviously hoping to use it to pursue Nugatti onto the roof of the spaceship. Nathan grabbed his arm, stopping him.
Don't be a fool. He'll pick you off as soon as you stick your head out. We need to use one of those ladders at the rear of the ship to give us more cover.
Rongad nodded his agreement, and together he, Nathan, Romana and the doctor ran back along the length of the ship, leaving a confused-looking steward in their wake. The doctor took the lead in mounting the new ladder, much to Rongad's obvious annoyance. The doctor had no difficulty opening the hatch at the top, the pressures without and within having equalized. Wind rushed past the opening as the doctor cautiously poked his head through. There was a narrow walkway running along the back of the ship.
its only safety feature twin chains suspended from posts spaced every 3 meters running along either side of that same walkway. Clearly, this exposed avenue was never intended for use in flight, at least while underway in atmosphere. Nevertheless, this was where they had to go.
Hold on tight!
The Doctor advised behind him as he clambered onto the walkway. Gripping onto the chain-link fences for all they were worth, the museum party plus Rongad slowly made their way forward towards the prow of the ship. As they approached, they could see Nugati standing with his arms raised, his jacket flapping wildly around him. Although difficult to make out over the howling wind, he was clearly chanting something. Of what words could be heard, some were partly comprehensible to the Time Lords, and they guessed they were ancient Kairoan. Of the rest, they hardly sounded like words at all, guttural, twisted, perverted sounds, a language not of this universe. The chanting stopped, and Nugati looked straight at them.
"You were foolish to follow me here,"
he said with a grim smile.
"I have allies, remember?"
As he said this, the Doctor, Romana, Rongad and Nathan heard another roar, like a competing gale or a freight train approaching. This sound was coming from behind them.
Get down!
The Doctor cried instinctively. They all pressed themselves flat against the roof of the ship, and not a moment too soon. A sizable black shape roared over their heads, at least 8 feet long from head to tail, and probably 10 feet in wingspan. As soon as it had passed, the companions all regained their feet in order to improve their view. As they did so, the thing landed on the roof beside Dr. Nugati. He began to clamber onto its back. In many ways, the entity resembled the creature which had been summoned in the hall of Dunbar House, only instead of roaring flame, this thing seemed to consist of nothing but impenetrable oily black smoke.
"I've got an idea,"
Nathan cried. As he said this, Nugati finally achieved a position on the creature's back to his liking.
"Once again,"
he said with a cheery wave.
"Toodle pip."
As he said this, there was a dull clang, the tolling of a bell. Nathan stood with the phoenix bell in his hand. For a second time, a sound like an approaching tornado came from behind the party. The phoenix landed gracefully beside Nathan on the roof of the ship. Thankfully, for now, the ship itself did not ignite.
"Go get him, boy!"
Nathan cried, pointing at the black winged thing with Nugati perched on top. The black creature launched from the ship, twisting away from them. The phoenix launched after it, hot in pursuit. The museum party plus Rongad watched the twisting chase as both entities flew ever onwards into a storm-tossed darkened sky. Eventually, all was lost to distance and the clouds. Romana turned to face the Doctor.
I suppose there's a chance the scarab might have dropped onto Hung-Arean. Perhaps last forever, or at least for generations.
The Doctor pursed his lips.
But even if that were so, it would still leave this system in its somewhat fractured state. Then again, inconvenient as that would be for us, it might be an acceptable outcome, with regards avoiding further, greater trouble.
Romana waggled her head noncommittally.
I suppose you might be right. And we could always have the TARDIS towed out of the system by some obliging non-Albion vessel. But I sense you don't believe this is the case.
The Doctor chuckled mirthlessly.
When have we ever been that lucky? Lucky 13 may prove a very sick joke indeed.
He looked around him, then stared Romana dead in the eyes once more.
I suspect we have much work ahead of us on Hung-Arean.